presentation by Dr. Raj Vedam. Sir is going to be joining us online. I take this opportunity to introduce Dr. Raj Vedam briefly. Sir has achieved PhD in electrical engineering and has many years of multidisciplinary work experience in diverse industries, including power, aircraft, automation, etc. Dr. Vedam believes that an evidence-based narrative of the Indian history is urgently needed to correct the grievous distortion of the history of Bharat. With this, I welcome Sir to kindly present. We welcome you, Sir.
Thank you. So thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me to this talk. It's a privilege. I'm deeply honored to give this talk. So let me hide some of the meeting controls over here. So I'll be talking Houston, and I'm also teaching at the Hindu University of America. So the first thing I'd like to present is a prelude to set the context. We have an unsatisfactory historiography of India. So what I'm presenting might be new to some people. It might be disconcerting to some, but I come from an evidence-based perspective, and I'd like to talk about some of the observations that we can make. At the very outset, we can see that the historiography of India has been controlled and written by 5 frameworks. One is a colonial, second is a Eurocentric, third is the missionaries, the fourth is a socialist academia bias, and fifth is the Marxists. So we see that each of these actors have had different reasons to narrate the history of India in a certain way. The colonialists wanted to show Indians as backward, primitive, superstitious, and how they need the white man's touch to civilize them. So they came with a certain narration of Indian history. The Eurocentric people wanted to address why are Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek related? And so that question led them to make some assertions on Indian history in addition, and we'll see that. And the missionaries obviously wanted to convert Indians to Christianity. So they came with a certain way of looking at Indian history and a certain way of translating the Indian works and so on. And since 1947, we have unfortunately inherited a socialist academia bias. And since 1971, at least, a Marxist bias in addition. The socialists and Marxists are interested in looking at all of history as a history of class conflicts. So when they see history as a history of class conflicts, then you have to have the oppressed kind of a view of all things in history. And so they're interested in trying to overturn the old order and usher in a classless utopian society. Towards that, they view all of Indian history, civilization as backward, primitive, something that has to be removed for progress and things of that nature. So these 5 frameworks have co-opted history and added their ideologies and led to a subversion of the identity of Indians in the present time. So this is very important for us to understand when we take a look at NCERT textbooks or narratives of the government or the judicial or the media and others. This is the kind of narration that is out there. So these corruptions are not new. Like I said, that happened over 300 years. We have had, starting with colonial hegemony, people like the Portuguese, Dutch, French, British, and in the 16th to the 20th century, coming in with ideas like Sandrocatus, trying to find who is the Sandrocatus that Megasthenes talked about, and phonetically identifying him as Chandragupta Maurya, thereby distorting the Indian chronology, because the Mauryas, according to the Purana chronology, are much earlier than the 300 BCE time frame that he has been put into. Then the notion that Sanskrit is the daughter language of Proto-Indo-European. Then the notion that Aryans either invaded or migrated to India in 1500 BCE. Then the notion that the earlier civilization Harappans were isolate, or they might also be the later Dravidians. And the fact that they come out with the notion that there are 2 language families in India. So these are some of the colonial inputs over here. The Christian imperialism came along with missionaries like Robert Calvin, Jew, Pope from 1500s to present, with ideas that Hinduism is a post-flood, the flood is Noah's flood we're talking about here, a post-flood religion. It is caste-ridden. Dravidians are oppressed people, and Brahminical Aryans are evil. They brought in these notions into the historical narrative. Then the Eurocentric scholars, people like Max Muller, Herbert Leslie, and others, along with the notions of linguistics, with tools like anthropology and their invention of caste and so on, came about with Aryans as a race. That was a new input, that Aryans were a race and a caste system and two language family. So they had convergent ideologies. And if you think that is a thing of the past, unfortunately, that is not true. These are there even in the present day corruptions. For example, our academia today takes all of this as a received wisdom. They do not question it, because it suits the socialist and the Marxist purpose to look at Indian history in the way the colonialists and the Eurocentric and the missionaries wrote it. It serves that purpose. So they're taken the received wisdom, continuing with the idea that Sanskrit is a daughter language of PIE, Aryans in India in 1500 BCE, and so on. And along with archaeology today. So archaeology, people like Maria Gimbutas, Colin Renfrew, and others with the Kruger hypothesis and all these things, they attempt to align whatever archaeological finds along with the linguistic notions of Aryan, Dravidian, and these kind of things, hand in hand with genetics, people like David Reich and others, where the methods of genetics are co-opted to try to make them align with the chronology in linguistics. So these are the kind of circular dependencies and questionable assumptions that have been brought to bear on Indian history narrative, even to the present times. So what I'm saying might seem strange to you, but I've done a lot of research on this and given several talks on the subject. So I come saying that we need an evidence-based history. It has got to be rational. It has got to be logical. We have to rationally and logically analyze the data that people use. What are the models that people use to make their claims? What are the methodologies they follow? What frameworks have they utilized? What are the claims? Do they follow from the methodology they have set? So we need to have a very rational way of approaching this. And there's a whole lot of data for history, archaeology, climate records, astronomy, religion, sciences, foreign traveler accounts, literature, genetics, and so on. So we can have many models, the linguistic model, archaeology model, genetics model, astronomy model, and many, many other models. So I come with a model-based analysis of the narratives on Indian history, and I look at things in a multidisciplinary sense. As a scientist, this is what I attempt to do. I try to see if I take a discipline like, for example, archaeometallurgy, and try to see what are the things it can answer about our history. Can it be fit into a logical, rational framework? So those are the kind of things that I do, and try to see, do the narratives that we have from these various models, after we critique them, do they follow the so-called linguistic analysis model that has been imposed on our history? So I try to address those kind of questions. And one might think, so what? What's a big deal? So what if the Aryans came in 1500 BC, or they did not come at all, and so on? Unfortunately, this has affected people in India in a pervasive way. There is a false narrative that there's an Aryan invasion in 1500 BCE, and these illiterate nomads from Central Asia, they destroyed the superior civilization of Harappa, and India had to wait for another 1,000 years. In this 1,000 years, these illiterate nomads are running around with caste, cow, curry, and all this nonsense, and they had to wait for 1,000 years for civilization to return to India. After Magadha made contact with the Greeks, suddenly we got Ashokan script, Brahmi came about, we became literate, so we became civilized. So civilization came to India 1,000 years after Harappa. So this is the narrative out there. Then they turn around and say, your civilization is very young. It has not had enough gestation time to generate knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and so on. Therefore, if you have any works that show advanced knowledge, you must have got it from the earlier civilizations of the Greeks, Babylonians, and so on. So this is the kind of spurious narrative that is put over there. And I try to show in this caricature over here, they say that the script Brahmi is derived from Aramaic, from the Levant Semitic scripts that came into India. They say Aryans, they brought Sanskrit into India. They say math and sciences came from Greece to India. They say astronomy came from the Babylonians to India. And the Turkic Muslims got us culture, cuisine, architecture, music, and civilization. And the British brought us science, technology, and rational thought. And also some go around today saying that even Bhakti was taught to us by Saint Thomas, who's apparently landed in Muziris in Kerala. So these these are the kind of notions that are being played over there. What we see is the denial of agency in history has led to a gross distortion of identity. And today there are divisive forces in India based on these spurious ideologies. So we see there's a criminal distortion of the history of Indian civilization, anchor points of chronology, and every aspect of Indian knowledge systems, which this conference is all about, every aspect of Indian knowledge systems is impacted by this narrative. So it's very, very important for us to understand what these things are. Well, I'm not going to go into this today because it's far beyond the scope of my talk today, but I have been working on an evidence-based rational examination of facts, where I've examined the claims from many, many areas and how they hold up to the enforced historiography that we have to suffer today. And I see that through my model-based analysis of evidence, I see from textual evidence, archaeology, genetics, climatology, geology, or migration theory, and they show that India is a very ancient civilization. So once we are able to remove this constraint of 1500 BCE, then we have the intellectual freedom to investigate in full concordance with the evidence that we have to see how ancient is the Indian civilization, how ancient are the roots of some of our knowledge systems, and how do these knowledge systems impact other worlds. So this is what we can do. And some of these are in my talks on YouTube. I also offer a course of this in Hindu University of America. So given that, we accept that, yes, the current narratives are wrong, 1500 BC is too constraining tight fit on the Indian civilization, and it is wrong. If we accept that, then the next question is, okay, if India is a very ancient civilization, then you must have evidence of that in your knowledge systems. If you don't have a corpus of knowledge systems that is consistent with an ancient civilization, then maybe what these Westerners are saying that must be true, that you're a young civilization. So we have to see, do we have a vast accumulation of knowledge in India? And I'll talk very, very briefly on that in this address. So the sources of knowledge always have to go back to the very basics over here. We have two categories of knowledge over here. One is Shruti, that which is heard, things like the Vedas, Rig, Sama, Yajur, Atharva, Samhitas, mantras, hymns, prayers, the Brahmanas, whose are commentaries on hymns, rituals, science, Aranyakas, rituals, philosophy, Upanishads, philosophy, and the Smriti category, that which is remembered, things like the 6 Vedangas, grammar, meter, astronomy, rituals, the Itihasas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, text, Artha, Dharma, Kama, Moksha, the Puranas, Kavyas, Bhashyas, Shutras, Shastras are various schools of philosophy, Nibandhas, politics, medicine, culture, arts, and so on. So what we're seeing is there is a bedrock of knowledge systems in India within which anybody could find intellectual fulfillment. You like politics? Yeah, there's a whole lot to learn in Arthashastra and other such things over here. You like medicine? Yes, there is a lot of works in medicine, astronomy, mathematics, you name it. So you could find intellectual fulfillment within this matrix of knowledge systems that India's had for the longest time. And we'll see some of this now. So when we talk about knowledge, the first thing to talk about is what is the epistemology, the methodology of knowledge that you have? Is there evidence that the civilization has an epistemology? And to see that, we go to the ancient darshanas, the Indian philosophical systems, and I listed some of them here. The Nyaya school and one-line statements, all knowledge is not intrinsically valid. Most knowledge is not valid unless proven. Truth exists whether we human beings know it or not. Rishi Akshapada Gautama, one of the greatest exponents of this. Yoga, all of us know this. Patanjali codified the yogas, Ashtanga Yoga here, yamas, niyama, asana, pranayama, and others. We know this. Vaisheshika, Rishi Kannada, which worked on perception and inference. Samkhya, Rishi Kapila, on systematic enumeration and rational examination of the facts. Purva Mimamsa, Kumarila Bhatta, works on reflection, consideration, profound thought, investigation, examination, and discussion. Uttara Mimamsa or Vedanta, there are up to 10 schools. I've only listed Adi Shankara here for Advaita, but there are a whole lot of them. And within this, we also find Jain, Buddhist works of philosophy, and so on. So even today, as a scientist, if I'm investigating a new subject, what do? I go to the library, take a look at all the prior works in the journals, articles, who talked about the subject. I try to enumerate all the known facts in this phenomena, Then I go through a process of a systematic enumeration and examination. What were the methodologies that these earlier paper writers or researchers, what did they do? Then I go through a process of reflection, consideration, thought, investigation. Maybe I write a program, maybe I go to the lab, do something, examine the results. I discuss with my colleagues and say, aha, I understand this now. And then I write a thesis or a paper. So even today, we apply the methods of our rishis when we are trying to do any of these works. So clearly, we have had an epistemology. In addition to epistemology, we need to understand pramana, the means of knowledge. What were the valid means of knowledge? Even today, there are some means that are valid. People, for example, very derisively say WhatsApp University, meaning that your knowledge is coming from not credible sources, those kinds of things. So what were the sources of authority for Indians to say your knowledge is valid or your knowledge is not valid? Well, we had pratyaksha, which is perception, anumana, inference. For example, if there is smoke, there must be fire. If I see smoke on a mountain, there must be a fire over there. Upamana, comparison, analogy. For example, if somebody has never seen a wolf and he asks me, I'm going to the jungle, but I've never seen a wolf. And I say that the wolf looks something like a dog. So this guy goes to the jungle, sees an animal that looks like a dog, says, that must be a wolf. So that by comparison. And you have postulation, derivation, circumstances. You have negative proof. For example, we can claim that there is no tiger who is a participant in this Zoom call. So things of this nature, negative perception, and Shabda Pramana, relying on the word of experts. We see that each of these darshanas only differed in what was admissible as a means of knowledge. Samkhya, for example, took both perception as well as inference as well as Shabda Pramana. The Charvakas in India, the traditional atheists, they only accepted perception. Only if they can perceive it, then it is true. They rejected the Vedas and everything is not valid. Buddhists, for example, they only accepted perception and inference. Just like Vaisheshika, perception and inference. Similarly, various other schools like Jainism and others, they only differed in terms of what were the pramanas that were admitted as valid means of knowledge. So this artificial dichotomy that we have today, that these are religions in India, Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, is not entirely true. They come from the same bedrock of knowledge systems. The only difference is what are the pramanas admitted by these various schools. So we can also say in a very big statement in today's contemporary world, when we see what is the goal of life, we see that for Indians, the goal of life has always been that of seekers. Our goal in life is to dispel ignorance, dispel the avidya and gain vidya, gain the knowledge of our true identity. And in order to do that, we can rely on any of the pramanas, darshanas, depending on sampradaya you're born into, and maybe in this lifetime or across multiple lifetimes based on your karma phala, you're going to acquire that knowledge of the self and so on. So the best way to describe the civilization is we have been seekers, as opposed to the dominant philosophies today, Abrahamic philosophies, where they are followers. They are obeyers. They follow a divine dictated law. That law might have come through some prophet or somebody else. And the goal in life is to follow the injunctions of that law for admission to heaven or eternal damnation. That is the goal in life. So we see that science flourished in India because of this philosophy of seeking. As long as ancient Greece had contact with India, they too had science. But once Greece was taken over by Rome, and Rome adopted Christianity in 330 current era, they fell into dark ages because it became a theological way of looking at things rather than this rational seekers way of looking at things. So they had dark ages till the so-called age of rationalism in Europe. And that's what we see over here. And as if we need one more example, here is something from Yajnavalkya's Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, this famous Shanti mantra, Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityoma Amritam Gamaya. So this is saying from ignorance, lead me to truth. From darkness, lead me to light. This is what you're seeing. This is a civilization that exalted seeking truth as the goal of life. And we see this from very ancient times to the present times. We have seen this kind of thing. And it's also interesting to see what is the antiquity of these darshanas that we have been talking about. Well, we can see that the Kapila, who mentions works in Samkhya, this is mentioned in the Rig Veda itself. So it is as ancient as Rig Veda. Samkhya is pretty ancient. Then we are seeing that Rishi Kannada, who worked on Vaisheshika, he mentions Samkhya and Mimamsa, but he does not mention Buddhism. Buddha, according to the Purana chronology, is 1800 BCE. Therefore, we had to put Buddha over here at 1800 BCE and Vaisheshika prior to that, and Mimamsa prior to that, Samkhya prior to this. And Jaimini, who is before Kannada and probably after Kapila, so we put Jaimini over there, and Akshapada Gautama, Nyaya Sutras, these are used by the Buddhists. So it is earlier than Buddha itself. So if we take a relative chronology of darshanas, we know that the anchor date of Buddha today, we know is a big mess based on Western chronology, is a very, very big mess. Purana chronology, if we take 3102 as the anchor date, that is the chronology, then we see that these go to much earlier time frames over here. And if we take a look at Vaisheshika, very important for our knowledge, Indian knowledge systems, we see that it is Pratyaksha perception is of two kinds, external and internal. External arising from senses and world objects, internal knowing through the mind. And Anumana reaching new conclusion and truth from observations and previous truths, applying reason. This is exactly the scientific method. This is exactly scientific method where we reach new conclusion and truth by observations and previous truths. That's what we do, applying reason, logic through this mechanism. And Rishi Kannada spelled it out a very long time ago. And very quickly, what was the knowledge systems like in the ancient world? We talked about India thus far. So what were the ancient civilizations to start with? Well, in India, we had, these maps are not realistic, but then there was a civilization over here. The time frame put over here is 3000 BC, but the data is showing much earlier than that. Then we see in the Sumerian region, we have the Tigris, Euphrates, Mesopotamia, Babylonia in this time frame. In Egypt, we have civilization. In Greece, much later, 2100 BCE. In China, 2000 BCE. And later on in Africa. And also not shown here, but in the Mayan civilization, the Aztecs, we had things going on over there. And if you look at Egyptian epistemology, they had religious entities as a reference to abstract ideas, very similar to Indian Puranic way of knowledge systems, where religious players were used in Puranic stories to communicate some knowledge. Very similar thing in Egypt. Answers were within established religious tradition. Writing was very strong and upheld over there. They were a syncretic civilization and inclusive. This is what we see if you take a look at ancient Egypt. Mesopotamia, similarly, there's a They had three preconceptions for theory. Imagination. That is a process of clarifying the randomness found in nature. They see randomness in nature. They use their imagination to try and say, how does all this fit together? Deductive logic to find causal relationships and observation. Much later on in Neo-Babylon, they thought that the more mathematical a discipline, the more scientific it is. Chinese epistemology is very recent in comparison, 350 BCE. It's a holistic understanding of the world, very similar to Indians because it got from Buddhism and so on. Unity of all cosmos, heart-mind is a crucial part of self-awareness. Knowledge is a means of important element of human existence. And the big three pillars, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Those were the philosophical frameworks that they had. The Greek epistemology, well, this is based on the big three, Socrates, around 450 BCE, then Plato around 400 BCE, and Aristotle around 300 BCE, and so on. So these are the big three. And if you take a look at what Plato's philosophy was, he too is echoing Vaisheshika. You can't read this from there, but what he's saying is knowledge obtained from senses, knowledge of objects, colors, taste, and other such things is not real knowledge. So he's saying real knowledge comes from the mind, from understanding, and not from the sense objects. This is exactly what Vaisheshika is. And you're seeing echoes of that over here. So having said that, so let me go next to the roots of knowledge systems, where I'll give a very quick summary of knowledge systems itself. We see that medicine has its roots in Atharva Veda, leading to Ayurveda. We have seen Charaka, Shushruta Samhitas are huge compendiums of Indian knowledge, the medical works. We're also seeing the Mitannis, Hittites, Egyptians, and later Chinese are influenced by Indic systems from 2000 BC onwards. I'll show you how a little later. Medieval Europe depended on drugs from India all the way from the Greek times till much, much later, 16th century and so on. we're seeing that Arab medicine was based on Ayurveda since Bin Qasim's invasion of Sindh, 711 current era. From that time onwards, Ayurveda formed the corpus of European knowledge through colonial era. It was taught in British medical schools in India till 1880. It formed the core pharmaceutical methods. If you look at mathematics, it's amazing. We have a whole lot of application-driven historical growth of mathematics. For example, enumeration, counting of objects. We see that in Rig Veda, for example, numerals, arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, powers of 10, and they are part of Vedangas, essentially. We see mathematics applied as architecture. For example, Baudhayana Silva Sutra, geometry, right angle triangle, circle, pi, square root, all these kind of things. We see mathematics applied in commerce. Examples, Bakshali manuscript, 220 current era, carbon dated to that time. We are seeing arithmetic, algebra, solving equations, including mathematics of computing interest, compound interest, and things of that nature necessary for transactions. Mathematics applied to modeling. For example, Surya Siddhanta, Aryabhatiya, we're seeing trigonometry, spherical geometry, approximations of functions, solving equations, we're seeing all these things. Very advanced modeling. For example, we are seeing function approximation, properties, polynomial series, infinite series, solution of equations, algebraic geometry, calculus, combinatorics, discrete math in the works of Pingala, Hemachandra, Madhava, Yuktibhasha, and others' works. We are seeing these advanced things. So we can clearly show math had roots in Vedas, number systems. Harappa itself is showing standardization of measures, geometric principles. Silva Sutras, like I said, with geometry, square roots, Bakshali manuscript showing advanced mathematics and commerce. By Aryabhata's time, we are seeing greatly refined trigonometry, spherical geometry, algebra. Surya Siddhanta showing intricate mathematics and astronomical knowledge. It's also referring to extinct Siddhantas that came before it. Brahmagupta, Bhaskara 1, Bhaskara 2, they added to the corpus of works on algebra, positional math, on zero, functional approximation, value of pi. Kerala School of Math greatly refined astronomical models, developed essence of calculus, and in nearly our own times, Ramanujam, he continued the tradition of Indian mathematics, mathematicians with deep results in infinite series and so on. What about astronomy? I'm taking a high-level view of various fields over here. Initially, astronomical knowledge was embedded in stories, in the Puranas, in the Vedas, the Brahmanas, Upanishads. We can decode the stories and see the metaphor. If you understand what the metaphor is, you understand what the wisdom is communicating. In my talks, I've talked about this. We are seeing a heliocentric model encoded in Shatapatha Brahmana and Aitreya Brahmana. This may be surprising to many, but it is there. There are some things encoded over there, used by Aristarchus, the Greek, much later in 100 BCE. This gave way to Siddhantic astronomy, which is mathematical astronomy. Many works are lost. We know they exist because citations to them are there in Surya Siddhanta and other works. Math models were developed to estimate the course of sun, moon, planets. We have, for example, Aryabhatta, Surya Siddhanta, epicycle model, and other things. Estimation of precision. Precision is the rotation of the Earth by doing a circle literally in the sky, the axis of rotation, taking 26,000 years to complete a cycle. It is called Ayana Chalana in India. Vriddhigarga had noticed this, Varahamihira, and several others had estimated this. We are seeing development of trigonometry, spherical geometry, Surya Siddhanta, models to estimate eclipse, duration of eclipse, length of shadow of the moon, shadow of the earth. Aryabhatta has done all of those things. Estimation of curvature of the earth by Brahmagupta. Gravity is talked about in Rig Veda, Varamira, Bhaskaravan, Brahmagupta. Model for partial heliocentrism. We are seeing Nilakanta Somayaji. Same model was used by Tycho Brahe later on. All these centers of learning, for example, Ujjain was destroyed in India by Muslim invasions. And one of the last great Indian classical astronomer was Pathani Samanta Chandrasekhar in Odisha. And many people have translated Indian works, the colonials, starting with Cassini, 1691, Lee Gentle, Euler, and others. Everybody with a white font was very laudatory, praising Indian astronomy and so on. But from William Jones onwards, a controversy started because he was a linguist who saw the common Sanskrit, Latin, and Greek and proposed that these are all related because Aryans descended from Proto-Indo-Europeans had come to India via invasion or migration in 1500 BC. So when that started, all the ones shown in red here, they started distorting Indian astronomy with the notion that Indian astronomy cannot be that old. The reason is Indian astronomy shows great antiquity, far greater than that suggested by linguistic theories. So the controversies are there. How old is Indian astronomy? Where did it originate? Whether it's Babylon, Greece, all this kind of notions. And also they predispose a question. People like David Pingree and others, they predispose a question saying Indians learned from the Greeks. And they set out to answer, what did the Indians learn from the Greeks? What did the Indians learn from Babylon? So these are the kind of directions in which the modern scholarship has gone to analyze Indian astronomy. A different area, arts, music, earliest musical systems are from Samaveda. We see that the three-tonal liturgical music, the chanting example, Chandogya Upanishad is talking about this. Music is discussed in Bharata Muni's Natya Shastra. Musical intervals are based on chord ratios, not chord, but rope, using a rope chord, using these ratios. Pythagoras, who allegedly learned in India as the originator of Western music tradition, he too used chord-based ratio for music, considered for divine purposes. He erected a statue for his goddess of music, Muses, similar to Saraswati in India, and so on. Even the modern systems, the Zoom call that we're using, the cell phone that we're using, the laptop computer we're using, they're all based on digital systems. Digital systems today use things like NOT gates, AND gates, NAND gates, NOR gates, and so on. Now, I'm not saying Indians invented transistors and ICs. Don't take that away. That is not at all true. However, the language that makes these devices work, that is important. What is that logic? For example, Nasadiya Sukta has got A and not A. Pingala, Chandashastra, and his successors worked on combinatorics. Colebrook was a colonialist who wrote a work on Indian logic in 1824. And this influenced these two gentlemen who is known to almost every electrical engineer, George Boole and D. Morgan. So they were greatly influenced by this work. And this is known because Boole's wife, Mary Everest Boole, she wrote a letter to Jagdish Chandra Bose in 1901. And she said Indian logic had a profound impact on Boole and D. Morgan. It is the use of Boolean algebra today that enables the design and development of integrated circuits of complex digital systems. So Indian ecosystem is present even in the modern day works. And as if we need more evidence, there are archaeological remains of several universities in ancient India. For example, Ratnagiri, Vikramshila, Somapura, Takshashila, and Nalanda, and so on. Several books discuss this, Radha Kumud Mukherjee, Apte, as well as Sahana Singh. So having said that, let me quickly now talk to you about knowledge outflow in India. So we have said that India is an ancient civilization. We have said they had a strong epistemology and philosophy of knowledge building. And we have shown many, many domains in which Indians made great progress, and the evidence is there in massive epics and compendiums of these works like Surya Siddhanta, Charaka Samhita, and all of these things. We have evidence of these works. Now, there's also evidence of knowledge transmission from India, which is unacknowledged in the history of sciences in Western accounts. Western accounts obviously are hostage to this Aryan invasion theory and so on. So they position India as having received knowledge from these places, but the evidence is showing something else. And people often ask me, so if you say Indian knowledge went out of India, where is the evidence for that? Do you have any evidence at all towards that? And so I'll try to show some of the routes and other things over here. From very deep antiquity, when I say deep antiquity, this is a staggering 50,000 years ago. At this point, you must scratch your head and say, what is this guy talking about? To 300 BCE. So we have evidence that in DNA, for example, migrations out of India, and probably they spread shaman type of religion throughout the world. If you see the common shaman culture, it probably came from a common point, and that common point probably was in India. Then we're seeing ancient trade routes of East and West. In Pumpuha, Professor Ramaswamy, Bharatidasan University, 2 years ago, he published a paper based on underwater archaeology of the Bay of Bengal. So 25 kilometers outside the shoreline, at a depth of 125 meters, he has found remains over there, which is estimated to the last ice age, the late glacial maximum, putting it to around 18,000 to 15,000 years ago. And he's shown how Pumpuha was relocated several times because of submergence events. And he's showing an artificial harbor over there and under the sea and other things, showing marine activity at a very ancient period of time. In Lothal, clearly we know that, yes, there is marine activity 5,000 to 3,000 years ago. And we can see from Lothal over here, the ships used to hug the coastline and go all the way over here to Dilmun. Dilmun is where today's Bahrain is, and going all the way here where the Kassites were, the Babylonians were, and they were trading with them. That's evidence is very much present, land routes as well as sea routes. Vedic records of migration to the west, this accounts for linguistic affinity. In addition, the Anu and the Drihyu after the Dasaragnya of Rigveda. We are seeing when there was a climate change-induced migration. In science, climatology, we know there was a 100-year monsoon failure in 200 BCE. Soon after that, because of tectonic movements, the Saraswati River also dried up because the Sutlej, which was feeding into the ancient Saraswati, changed course and started feeding into the Indus. And that led to Saraswati becoming dry. So we know that. And that triggered several migrations out of India, and we have got evidence of that in addition. And we see that the Mitannis, Hittites, Elamites, Canaanites, and others were contacts within 2000 BC to 500. All that sciences suddenly show evidence of mathematics, evidence of medicine suddenly come. For example, Egyptian medicine. We are seeing the Ebers papyrus, Moscow papyrus, Smith papyrus, Kahun papyrus. All these works of mathematics and medicine only came from 1700 BCE, 1800 BCE, 1500 BCE. After this migration event is when we see this knowledge over here. Similarly, in the Mitanni and the Hittites, and the Kassites. Similarly, we are seeing these people living in northern Iraq, southern Turkey, and so on. Even their knowledge systems has come only after 1700 BCE, 1600 BC, after this migration. That is where we see this. And if you want to see a recent paper that talks about this, you can't read this from there. I apologize for that. In a bigger course, I'll talk to you about this. There's a paper in Science that came out in 2019 that talks about the Indian zebu. Zebu is a humped bull that we see in India. The remnants, the zebu was found in Anatolia. Anatolia is where Turkey is today, in 2200 BC, where they are postulating that after the 100-year monsoon failure in India, Indians migrated out with their cattle and settled in these areas. That is why we see Indian cattle remnants over there even today. So I have a whole lot of other evidence, including the presence of Indian langur on Minoan frescoes. Minoan culture is around 1200 BC, 1600 BCE in Greece, island of Crete. But we're seeing evidence of Indian contact over there. All the stories that we see in the Puranas have got a parallel with stories in Greece. I'm referring to those things in addition. MtDNA. Today, a whole lot of research has gone to show that some of the earliest migrations of the modern human was in Africa. L0 to L6 are the markers, MtDNA markers, 200 to 100,000 years ago. Then 90,000 years ago, this group of people left Africa, and in India, you have the lineages M, N, and R. And from here, they go into Europe, and they go into Southeast Asia, Australia, through Siberian land bridge, they go to North and South America. So these ancient migrations also took an early religion, which is shamanistic. We see shamans of there in Mongolia, in various parts of Asia, in Russia, in Siberia, Alaska, Native America, the same culture of beating drums, smoking, getting into a trance-like state like our tantrics do today. If you've seen the movie Kantara, you'll know what I'm talking about. Widespread in India, widespread everywhere. And this common religion came about perhaps in this time frame. A second route for knowledge transfers post-Alexander, 300 BC to 100 BC, the Seleucid Empire from the Mauryaans to the Mediterranean lands. This provided impetus for knowledge transmission. Evidence we're seeing in Library of Alexandria. We're seeing Eratosthenes' knowledge that's come from the Library of Alexandria. His knowledge is echoing knowledge already known in India and echoed in several texts. Hipparchus, he's called the father of trigonometry, but he only worked on chord tables. And we see that Surya Siddhanta's got trigonometry much earlier than him. Dioscorides, he wrote works on medical works. The drugs that he's using are all based on spices from India. Plants from India were used by Dioscorides and used in Europe for 16 centuries for medicine. That evidence is there. A third transmission mechanism is to China, Southeast Asia, Middle East, and beyond. From 300 BC to medieval period, the Silk Road. Silk Road was an informal trade network for many, many thousands of years. At least from 300 BC is what I'm saying, because we have the example of Indian medical text that has today come to be called as Boer manuscript. It was found in the Xinjiang province. And this was given to a British officer called Boer, so it bears that name, Boer manuscript. It has a Bela Samhita, it contains part of Charaka Samhita, it talks about the Rishis, Atriya, and others over there. And this was found in the Silk Route. The fact that Indian books were found in the Silk Route shows that even knowledge is transmitted. So this is an informal network from Southeast Asia, through China, through India, through Central Asia, all the way to Mediterranean lands. And as is there. Then the Roman trade from 200 BC to 500 current era. And one example is the Periplus of Erythraean Sea. This is a port Roman sailors document that tells them where are the ports in India for them to trade. So they would come from Mediterranean lands on their ships and alight in Alexandria in Egypt and cross this land bridge up to the Red Sea. In the Red Sea, Indian ships would be waiting for them, and those Indian ships would carry the merchants and the goods all the way to these various ports on the west coast of India, as well as the east coast of India. And when the winds are favorable, they again go back and they leave their merchants here with return merchandise, and they go through this land caravan here and back over here. This was the trade route. Evidence, we have Pompeii Lakshmi. This is Indian ivory carving of an Indian woman that was found in Pompeii, when the volcano Etna erupted there and covered that city. They recovered this artifact there from the Satvahana dynasty, literally. And Dioscorides, we already talked about him. The fifth route for knowledge transmission is Muslim transmission from 700 current era to 1600 current era. I'll end the talk pretty soon. We are seeing that after Bin Qasim had conquered this part of India, we had all of this is Abbasid Empire. You had Sindh, Pakistan, Persia, Arabia, you had Egypt, you had Algeria, Morocco, up to southern Spain, Cordoba. Indian knowledge was injected into all these places. Sanskrit works were translated into Persian, Arabic, and injected over here. Examples, we have Al-Fazari, who translated Brahmagupta's works, Manka, who was Indian physician court of Harun al-Rashid, who translated Shushrata Samhita to Persian, Ibn Sina, medical works of Sharaka Samhita, Abd Allah bin Ali, who had translated this work. All of these things, Al-Kindi, these are all the great scientists of Muslim era. Al-Fazari, Al-Kindi, Ibn Sina, they all relied on works from India. And the Baghdad House of Wisdom, set up by Harun al-Rashid in the 8th century. This was a translation school to translate Sanskrit, Greek, Syriac works into Arabic. We know that this had extensive impact not only on the Middle East, but also on Europe in that time frame. The sixth transmission route, this knowledge went to Europe via the Muslims. So we see that southern Spain was controlled by the Muslims. Northern Spain was controlled by the Christians. Southern Spain, Cordoba was the capital. Northern Spain, Toledo was the capital. At Toledo, there were translation schools, monasteries, Christian monasteries, whose only job was to translate Arabic texts into Latin in the 10th century, 11th century, 12th century, 13th century. Also in Sicily in Italy, Sicily was also under Islamic control, and there also they had access to Arabic texts. There too translations happened. And today we know several of those texts that are translated were Indian texts. So we see in Toledo in this time, Raymond of Toledo, who was Archbishop, he started the translation efforts. He led a team of Toledans, Jewish scholars, madrasa teachers, monks who translate Arabic to Castilian to Latin. One name from the past, Gerard of Cremona, translated 87 Arabic texts to Latin in math, astronomy, Greece. We have the names of those books. Through that, we know that they were Sanskrit works. Sanskrit works translated to Arabic, translated to Latin. That is how Europe in the Dark Ages got to know about knowledge systems. After Greece was invaded by Roman Empire, they had lost all knowledge. They were illiterate people in Dark Ages, and they learned that. This book was released by the Oxford Library, and it shows a painted book, an image in 12th century Britain, how they were doing surgery. These surgical methods are exactly what is described in Shushrata. So I was shocked when I saw that, and I immediately grabbed an image of that because it is an evidence that in this transmission, medical works were translated into Latin. From Latin, it has gone into Britain and is being practiced by the British doctors over there. Very interesting to see that. Similarly, in Sicily, Constantine, the African, who had translated some works, we are seeing Accursius, who had translated works of Galen, as well as this person, Gerard, who translated medical works, Fibonacci, who had taken Hindu-Arabic numeral system from Arabic sources in his work, the aphorisme by this person, who was translated by this one, the late, this time frame medical works, some more medical works over here, mathematical works. So we know several works of the Islamic people were translated into Latin, which in turn were Sanskrit works. So the seventh route for transmission, direct European transmission in medieval times and colonial times. We know of Marco Polo, 1295, John of Monte Corvino was a Catholic missionary active in Mylapore in 1291, Jordanus Catalani in Coilon, 1320, Nicola da Conti in 1420, Alfonsi Nictin of Russia, 1470. This is all before Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama came in the late 1400s, before him itself. Then colonialists from 16th to 20th century, Portuguese, Dutch, French, British, and also present-day Vedanta has been transmitted for quantum understanding. So this has not stopped. Evidence is there all over the place. So in conclusion, what we have shown is that the deep history of India thought in schools and universities is utterly wrong. 5 agencies have controlled their ideologies and framework: colonial, Eurocentric, missionary, socialist, academia, and Marxist. There is strong evidence to uphold antiquity of Indian civilization. Well-developed epistemology shows great antiquity, well-developed mathematics, well-developed astronomy. Roots of these knowledge systems show sources in India. Indian knowledge systems have seeded the ancient to modern world, very ancient period, Mesopotamia, Sumeria, Anatolia, Egypt, Babylon, Indo-Greek, Indo-Roman, Indo-Syrian, the Muslim period, colonial period to present. And all of this unacknowledged history needs a revision. So with that, I come to the end of my talk. So if you're interested in the subject, do go on YouTube and search for my name. You can see more talks, or follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, or this is my email. So thank you very much for listening patiently.